Welcome to the Legal Shark Tank, Strategies for DUI and Beyond with Shane the Shark, where we'll discuss the complexities of the legal system, demystify the process of criminal defense, and provide you with the tools and confidence to navigate your case.
Hello and welcome to the Legal Shark Tank, Strategies for DUI and Beyond. My name is Kevin Rosenquist, and of course I am here with Shane Herzner, and we're going to discuss understanding the role of chemical testing in OVI-DUI cases. Shane, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Kevin. It's good to be here.
All right. So what are the different types of chemical tests used in Ohio OVI-DUI cases, and how do they differ from like a field sobriety test?
Sure. The three different chemical tests that we have here in Ohio are blood, where they actually do a blood draw, urine, where they'll have you do a urine test or give a urine sample, and then you have the breath testing. So the breath testing is where you blow into one of the machines. Now, these machines are all located at the police stations, so they're not portable or breath tests that they actually have in the car. These are actual testing machines that are at the police station. Now, the way that these are different than the standardized field sobriety testing is that in Ohio, we have per se limits. So if you test above a 0.08, for example, in the breath test, you're presumed to be impaired. You can be found guilty of impairment if that test stays in. Whereas standardized field sobriety tests are tools that officers use to help them determine if they believe that you're impaired. So that's more of an opinion-based OVI, whereas the breath testing will give a per se violation.
Is that always been the case, or was there a time when they used the portable breathalyzers? Because I feel like I remember I haven't been pulled over for a DUI, but I feel like that I remember that just from TV, movies, whatever.
Yeah, they do use portable breath tests. Portable breath tests are generally used by the officers on scene to give them an idea of what your alcohol level is.
Okay.
But they cannot bring a portable breath test result in at trial to prove that you were impaired or to prove that you were over a per se limit. That has to be done with an approved breath testing machine that is approved by the Ohio Department of Health. In Ohio, the Ohio Department of Health approves all the chemical testing and breath testing machines. Okay,
got it. All right, that makes sense. So how accurate are these tests, the blood, the urine, the breath tests, in determining impairment?
Well, obviously, the blood is probably the most accurate since it's going straight to the source, and that's what they're measuring is your BAC and your blood alcohol content. So that's the most accurate one. But there obviously are some things that can contribute to even false highs in that. Breath testing is probably the second most consistent one. Urine is just, in my opinion, and I think the opinion of several experts, the absolute worst chemical test to determine active THC in a person's bloodstream or any kind of active drugs in their bloodstream by measuring the urine, because the urine could be in there for several hours.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about THC or marijuana, and obviously, I was trying to remember, is it illegal in Ohio?
It is now legal in Ohio, and they just approved recreational marijuana the last few years. And the first dispensaries for recreational marijuana just opened up here recently. So yes, and that's caused a lot of new litigation with marijuana because of the legalization. Yeah,
it seems like they haven't, at least last I heard, they haven't quite figured out how to test for that where it works, right? Where you can really tell if someone is high right now, because a lot of times it stays with them for longer than alcohol does, correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. The way that they test it now is they test it in your metabolite, so basically in your fat. So when you take a chemical test, so if you do a urine screen and it comes back, it'll come back as certain nanograms, and that nanogram isn't even active THC. It's THC, like you said, that since they're testing in your fat, it could be 30 days ago that you smoked marijuana, and yet you're still over the per se limit and not impaired at all. So unfortunately, the testing that they have currently through the urinalysis doesn't even test active THC. which is a huge problem in Ohio, especially for medical, when it was approved just medically, it was a problem. Now it's an even bigger problem now that it's been approved for recreational use.
Shane, if we could figure out how to design that test to work, we'll be billionaires. We'll be retired.
They're working on some new testing.
Yeah.
To try to get better, but it has not been approved in Ohio, and it is not currently being used in Ohio.
Yeah, I'm in Colorado. Obviously, we were the first to legalize marijuana, and I still, to my knowledge, there's no real good way that they have for testing other than, the eye test, if you will.
Yes, that's exactly right.
What factors affect the results of the tests?
There are a lot of different environmental factors that can affect breath testing. I know that the tests are designed to try to pick up some of these environmental factors, such as radio frequency. There are also some biological reasons why somebody's BAC may be elevated when they're not actually impaired. I remember I represented a client who worked at a laundromat, and he used a bunch of chemicals. And the particular breath testing machine that he was tested on couldn't differentiate the ethyl alcohol from the alcohol that was used in the chemicals that he was using every day. And so he tested, and he was tested over the legal BAC when we knew, according to how much he had to drink, he was nowhere over that. Also, I mean, there's a lot of error that comes in with operation. These officers that test clients on breath testing machines or any other machines, they're prone to make mistakes in their testing. They don't understand the science behind these breath testing machines. Their proficiency tests are simply, hey, this is how you operate the machine. This is what you need to do. There's nothing as far as giving them background or understanding of how the machines actually operate or the science behind the machines. There's none of that that's given to the officers. And that's, as a general rule, why I tell people, if ever offered a chemical test, don't take it, because there's so many issues that could come along with these tests. As we talked about earlier with the urine is just, in my opinion, a horrible way to test, because I don't think it tests accurately enough for either active THC, which we know is way off on that, or even for alcohol, because I've had people who have done breath tests and they were under the breath test, and then the officer believes they were impaired by some sort of drug, so they have them do urine. Well, we get the urine back, and the urine equivalent is much higher on the blood alcohol content than the breath test was. So it just shows there's so many inconsistencies in these tests that it's just not a good idea to take them if you've had any alcohol to drink at all. If
one of your clients had a beer or a glass of wine or something and was driving home and got pulled over, you would recommend they do not do any of the tests?
Yes. The standardized field sobriety tests, those roadside tests or roadside gymnastics, whatever you want to call them, there's no reason to take them. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, there's no reason to take them at all, because if the officer is pulling you out of the car at that point, they smell alcohol, they're going to make an arrest on you. And your performance on these tests, because you're nervous, you're on a roadside, there's lots of reasons why you may not perform well on.
Yeah, I've joked with friends about that before, that like, I don't think I do very good stone cold sober on some of those. They're like hopping on one foot and stuff. I'm like, my balance isn't what it used to be.
It's amazing to me, because when the officers go through training, they go through training through a national training program. And when they do this training, they'll dose subjects. So they'll give subjects a certain amount of alcohol and then put them through these tests so they can determine what their BAC is. So to learn what clues to look for. But you got to remember, when these people are performing these standardized field sobriety tests, they're in most of the time at hotels. So they're in a giant ballroom or something like that with no need to be anxious about being arrested. There's no cars flying by. There's no flashing lights. There's no, fear of anything. So, of course, the results in that particular test is going to be different than somebody who's on the roadside who's looking at potentially being arrested for a DUI.
Yeah, you're right. Standing on the road, people looking at you as they drive by, like you're feeling bad about yourself. There's so many factors that go into that. That's a really good point. I remember back in the day hearing stories of where people there'd be false positives from like things like cough medicine and NyQuil and things like that. Is that still an issue too, or have they kind of figured that out? It's
still alcohol. So it's ethyl alcohol in a lot of these. So it'll still come up. And technically, if you are drinking or consuming those types of medicines, then yes, you could be over the legal limit. As a matter of fact, I think that it's more common here in Ohio, depending on the circumstance, if you get limited driving privileges, sometimes those limited driving privileges, you have to have an ignition interlock in your car. And that's basically a breath test machine that you have to blow into before the car will start.
Yeah.
It is much more common for me to see people who are locked out of their car because they took medicine the night before, took medicine the morning of, and tried to blow into that machine. That's more common than someone getting an OVI for it, but it's still a problem.
Yeah. So we talked about refusing the chemical tests. Can you explain Ohio's implied consent law and what penalties would someone get for refusing a chemical test?
Yes, in the Ohio implied consent laws are a little bit confusing. So on a first offense, if you're pulled over and you're offered a chemical test, if you refuse that chemical test, the Ohio BMV will suspend your license immediately for a 1-year period of time. And the officer will fill out some paperwork, and that paperwork goes to the Ohio BMV to show that you're under suspension. If you take a chemical test and you fail that chemical test, your license is suspended immediately for a 90-day period of time. So the Ohio BMV suspends it right away. And the reason why they're able to immediately suspend your license is because of implied consent, essentially saying that as an agreement to get your driver's license, you agree to submit to a chemical test. And if you're over a legal limit, you'll be suspended right away. And if you do refuse, you're also suspended. The confusing part about the implied consent is that if you take a chemical test and you get convicted of an OVI, that 90-day suspension from the BMV automatically becomes at least a 1 to 3 year license suspension by the court, because an OVI conviction has a mandatory 1-year driver's license suspension up to 3 years. So essentially, I tell clients, your license suspension is going to be the same at the end of the day, whether you take a test or whether you refuse, because if convicted, that 90 days becomes a 1 year, just like a refusal. And that's where officers kind of trick people in, like, hey, would you rather a 90-day suspension or a 1-year suspension? Of course, everybody would much rather have a 90-day suspension than a 1-year suspension, but they don't tell them upon conviction it's going to be a 1-year suspension.
Oh, yes. Okay. I see what you're saying.
It's a little tricky.
Yeah, that's a little shady. It's a little shady.
Yes, I agree. And that's why implied consent is important. It's important for people to understand that it is completely, that suspension that you get for the implied consent is completely different than the suspension that you get if you're convicted of anything for an OVI.
So how do you challenge the chemical test results in OVI and DUI defense cases?
In Ohio, it's much more difficult to challenge breath tests. We are not able to challenge the general reliability of breath testing machines. So in other words, we can't have an expert witness come in and say, hey, these breath test machines, it's voodoo science, don't believe them, it's garbage, you can't believe this machine at all. A lot of states allow you to bring somebody in to testify to that, or you could just, without an expert witness, although I think you would need an expert witness, you could just challenge the general reliability. Ohio, we're not able to do that. In Ohio, we can only challenge the specific machine and if there are issues with that specific machine. So in other words, we've got to pull all the breath testing records, verify the maintenance, verify that it's properly calibrated, different things that we have to look at when it comes to the history of the machine to challenge that particular machine and the particular test that your client has. There's a lot of different challenges that you can do with blood and urine, though. Those are a little bit different. There are different standards for how a urine test is supposed to be conducted in Ohio, and they set up all the standards. Although nowadays it's pretty easy for the officers to follow them because they have a checklist that they go through. But I still see issues with urine testing because there's different standards. And blood testing the same way. We actually have one pending blood test right now where there's a lot of issues. It wasn't drawn correctly. We haven't been provided with the information concerning the person that drew the blood, and also the blood vial that was returned to the lab wasn't sealed properly. So a lot of different issues that you can find on those, besides from just the breath testing machine.
Are there common errors that occur during the testing? Can there be actual errors within it?
Yeah, the breath testing machines, especially some of the newer ones, will come up with error messages. So for instance, if they're getting radio frequency interference, it'll come up with an RFI detect error. If there's an issue with residual alcohol getting into it, because the mouthpieces are designed to try to prevent that. And they say that the machines are supposed to pick it up. It doesn't always happen. There's, again, because of different, if you belch before and you have residual alcohol in your mouth, that could have an effect on it. And the machines are supposed to be designed to prevent that, but it doesn't always happen that way. Most of the time, if you're going to challenge a breath testing machine, it's imperative to have an expert witness. And there are a lot of good expert witnesses here in Ohio that can testify at trials. And I have used expert witnesses on breath testing machines because, quite frankly, if you take a breath test and you're over, unless there's some really big error with the administration of the test or with the records, which again, it's pretty much check the box type thing, you really need that expert witness to come in and look at it. That's what we had an expert witness in the case that I was talking to you about, the person who worked for the laundromat.
And have there been any recent technological advancements in chemical testing?
Ohio just recently approved or in the process of approving a new breath testing machine called the Intox 9000. Right now, there are three other ones, the Intox 8000 and two other machines. But those machines are older. I mean, we're talking most of these machines have been in operation since the 80s, the 90s. I mean, they're really, really old. The Intox 8000 was supposed to be their newest, latest, greatest machine, but there were so many issues involving that machine that they were constantly changing. As defense attorneys found weaknesses in the machine, they were constantly changing the regulations to combat those, which instead of correcting the science, they were changing the rules, which in my eyes are crazy. So I don't know, this Intox 9000 is supposed to be the newest machine and new testing. So we'll see how that goes. When it comes to drug testing, they're now doing, it's kind of like a presumptive test where they have you put like a swab or something in your mouth, the side of your mouth, and they roll it around in the side of your mouth and they get it there. And they're allegedly supposed to be able to produce a presumptive test on scene whether somebody is positive for a particular drug. And then they're able to send it off to a lab to confirm that and to actually get an amount. So that's kind of an interesting, I think, new test that'll be coming down the line. And I think that's as a result of, like we had indicated before, the marijuana metabolite, since the testing now is so incredibly outdated. I mean, it's been around since what, the 70s, I think, is what the per se, a lot of these per se, especially the marijuana has been around.
Oh, wow. Yeah. You'd think that they would have come a lot further than that with technology advancing the way that it has.
Well, especially if you're going to approve it for medical purposes and you're going to approve it for recreational purposes, you should have thought down the road, hey, well, what about people who are consuming this and then driving? Because there's a difference between being impaired and consuming something. So it's a shame that the state legislature was so quick on moving the approval of legalizing recreational, but they didn't follow through with the OVI laws like they should have.
Yeah. And it's just, there's so many factors that go into that too. I mean, you can have like a bigger guy who consumes a lot of marijuana and, versus a small person that doesn't, and it'll affect them in very different ways. Yes.
Or just somebody who could have consumed it 5 days earlier.
Right. Yeah.
And now they're getting pulled over for a speeding ticket, but they have maybe they have a little bit of marijuana in their car. Well, the officer smells it, runs them through some of these field sobriety tests, makes the opinion, well, geez, they've got to be impaired because I see the marijuana and they were speeding. Well, I'm going to make them do a urine test. Then you do a urine test, and I guarantee you're going to be over the legal limit of the marijuana metabolite if you test through urine. So that's the crazy part about it is, unfortunately, the science for the OVI did not catch up with the legalization. And it's going to take some time before it actually does. I guarantee you, kind of like anytime you have a new breath testing machine, defense attorneys like myself are going to look to find out where the weaknesses are and where the inconsistencies are in those particular machines. The same thing is going to happen when they start learning better processes on how to test somebody for chemicals such as drugs through these new testing methods. So it'll be a challenge for us. And that's one of the reasons why I love doing the defense work, is it's constantly changing, and we're looking for different things with the testing so that we can show that this testing isn't as accurate as people would like to believe it is.
Yeah. Plus, I feel like if someone has smoked too much marijuana, they're not speeding. They're probably going very slow.
That's exactly. Or in the drive-through someplace or something like that. That's why I said that the marijuana stuff just drives me nuts every time.
Yeah. Long way to go on that.
Long way to go.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us on this episode of the Legal Shark Tank Strategies for DUI and Beyond with Shane Herzner. If you want to get in touch with Shane, visit herznerlaw.com. And of course, don't forget to like and subscribe and keep up with all things Ohio DUI law. Shane, so good to see you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.